Hello, this is TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. This time around, we turn our attention to a major global event, the 16th edition of the BRICS Summit taking place in Kazan in Russia. Now, if you're wondering why this seemingly odd gathering of countries should matter to you, and for those unfamiliar with the BRICS, don't worry, we're here to break it down. Now, the acronym stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the initial 5 member states. Now, if you're thinking, wow, what a random group of countries, well, you're not wrong. So without further ado, let's see how the summit held this week has unfolded thus far.
Vladimir Putin, facing international isolation and a warrant from the International Criminal Court, has re-emerged on the global stage, hosting 36 world leaders at a BRICS summit in Russia. The summit hosted in Kazan was Putin's largest international gathering since the invasion of Ukraine. The BRICS group, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has expanded to include nations like Egypt, the UAE, and Iran. As it turns out, more are interested in joining, at least according to Vladimir Putin.
It would be wrong to ignore the unprecedented interest of the countries of the Global South and East in strengthening contacts with BRICS. More than 30 countries have already expressed a desire to join the bloc in one form or another.
During the talks, leaders emphasized the need to reduce dependence on the US dollar, a move aimed at mitigating the impact of Western sanctions. Putin also underscored the importance of strengthening ties with China to, as he put it, promote global stability and a multipolar world order, with Xi Jinping lauding the friendship between the two countries.
The international situation is becoming chaotic and intertwined, but I firmly believe that the profound friendship between China and Russia from generation to generation will not change.
The summit also saw UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in attendance, despite criticism from Western nations, particularly Ukraine. Guterres, however, reiterated his stance that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a breach of the UN Charter.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now, you can say BRICS is basically like that weird friend group in college where you wondered, how do these people even know each other? But somehow they've managed to stick together since 2006, hosting annual summits, talking about the world's problems, and maybe, just maybe, plotting how to dethrone the United States. Now, this year alone, BRICS has expanded, adding Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. But this isn't just a casual expansion. Russia, in particular, is using the summit to send a very pointed message to the United States, like, hey, we're still here, we have friends, and no, you can't sit with us. So what's Putin's big move? Well, it's not just making awkward speeches in Kazan. Russia wants to use the summit to challenge the almighty dollar. Now, the BRICS bloc has long discussed creating an alternative to the dollar, which would be a huge deal. Now think about it. The US enjoys an insane amount of global influence because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Now, most international trade occurs in dollars. Oil, wheat, you name it. It's all priced in those crisp green bills. So if Putin and his pals can convince the growing gang of BRICS countries to dump the dollar, well, that's a serious punch in America's economic gut. Now, that is if it were to even happen. Now, you might be wondering, what's stopping them from doing it? Well, for starters, not everyone in BRICS sees eye to eye. This is a group that includes India and China, 2 countries that have more tension between them than a room full of exes at a wedding. And let's not forget Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, the same 2 countries that have spent the last few decades glaring at each other across the Persian Gulf. So it's not exactly smooth sailing. But now, despite the differences, Russia is betting big on a plan to weaken the dollar's dominance. Now, first, there's the idea of creating a BRICS payment system. Now, picture a global Venmo, but without the US banks involved. Russia wants to develop a network where BRICS countries can trade with each other in their own currencies, now bypassing the need to use dollars. Sounds complicated? Well, that's because it is. But for Russia, the incentive is huge. Sanctions. And here's the final point. Russia wants to sidestep that kind of economic pain by building a system where it doesn't have to worry about US sanctions at all. Now, if BRICS pulls this off, it would fundamentally change the way international trade works and reduce the US's ability to economically punish countries like Russia. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Joshua Bergen from the Warsaw Security Forum. Sir, thank you so much for being with us here today on TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
Now, sir, so Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, arrived in Kazan today to attend this BRICS Summit. Now, what does this mean? How can you comment on this?
We've been watching BRICS countries now for the better part of 2 decades. Their formalization only about 15 years ago, but the community is growing. Clearly, there's growing economies there, and a combined resistance across, say, Russia, China, South Africa, and others for sort of de-dollarization of the world and sort of to moving away from the U.S.-led financial order. The notion that others are showing up as well, if for no other reason to observe, should not be surprising.
And now, on the other hand, what can you say is what's at stake here? Why is Russian President Vladimir Putin, what is he trying to signal here to the West in having this meeting?
Well, I would say 2 things. These are ongoing meetings. This happens annually. But Russia in particular, Putin in particular at the moment, I think he's signaling more to his domestic audience at home that he's a big man globally, that he can bring all these world leaders together, that he's respected by them in the context of his ongoing war with Ukraine. The West has united against Russia's aggression in Ukraine in almost an unprecedented way. And to that end, Putin's having to signal to his own domestic audience that, look, I have my key folks as well. Interestingly, about a week ago, I saw a graphic, a sort of a cartoon, if you will, put up at the GRU. And I've tried to find it for the purpose of this episode. But in this, the Russian intelligence services show a sort of an emaciated West, the US, Germany, the UK, and others looking emaciated on one side, facing off with the BRICS countries, and other parts of the world with Russia looking robust, a fat bear, et cetera, et cetera. I think that not only do parts of the Russian intelligence services and even the government believe that that is the way the world functions, but perhaps more importantly, Putin has to signal to his base that that's the way it is, even if we can clearly see that it's not.
Now, how does the BRICS aim to serve as a counterweight to the current Western political and economic order?
Well, again, the big issue for them is, can they unify? Can they come to terms with the things that they want to do? De-dollarification, or sort of stepping away from the dollar-led order where things like sanctions can bite, where things like preventing illegal trade, preventing a whole range of activities, they're trying to avoid that. So they need to come up with a different currency. The problem is they can't work well enough together. If you look at the diverging interests, no one's going to cede to the other person's currency. Countries like India, which have a long and extensive history with the West, including diaspora in the UK, diaspora in the United States, they're in it for sort of transactional reasons. If for no other reason right now, then they're getting cheap and limited cost energy from Russia, etc. But I don't see that they're able to really achieve their aims. In many ways, it's kind of like the Russian-led Eurasian Union. They have meetings and they talk about things, but their diverging interests make it impossible to actually lead to really productive ends and outcomes.
How do you think that the BRICS expansion is going to impact Western-dominating institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, for instance?
Well, it depends on how much money they're spending. I mean, I don't see the BRICS-led economic fund or doing anything in particular, whereas I see the Chinese-led one doing things and making investments around the globe. Unless you would see the member states truly commit to the BRICS institutions in a way that's meaningful, then I think it's mostly a meeting and talk shop, which signals sort of the cleavage in the world at the moment. For many that were at the Warsaw Security Forum a few weeks ago, we heard throughout the conference the great concerns that many longtime observers have for war. I am one of those. I think that war is potentially in the offing in the near term. I think that has huge costs for the world, et cetera. And I think, frankly, these BRICS meetings and the degree to which those that are sort of opposing the Western order are aligning around each other, again, notwithstanding India, which I don't see fully in that club, I think we're seeing an alignment. And these moments are ways for them to signal to each other that they're friends, that they're able to cooperate. I see that as pariah. I don't think it lasts indefinitely, but I do see sort of an alignment around sort of defining who's on which side of conflicts that are brewing at the moment, and even around the world in other places.
Do you think that they're actually going to be, I mean, it might be tough to say, but do you think that they're going to be successful in challenging the Western-dominated international order?
Well, again, every one of these countries we can't ignore them. Russia's too big to ignore. China's too big to ignore. India certainly the largest population in the world and on track to be for the next century or more. Can't be ignored. South Africa can't be ignored. The big question is, can they work with each other? Do they trust each other? Do they trust each other enough to build the sort of confidence that will then lead to others investing there? At the end of the day, nothing has changed on the fact that the dollar remains the haven in times of insecurity. And while I have concerns about the U.S. Dollar, I have concerns about the U.S. governance, etc., there's not a better alternative at the moment.
So what do you think, for example, I mean, you're saying that they're having a lot of challenges here, but what do you think, for example, Vladimir Putin is going to try to do or to persuade these countries? And of course, it's expanding, right? We have Iran that's entering, we have Ethiopia. What is he going to try to do to kind of persuade these countries in order to achieve his goals and to kind of set their differences aside?
Well, I mean, at this point, I don't think that's the clear objective in the short term. There's a lot of talk about these things. There's a lot of sort of, we need to move away from the dollar, et cetera. But in order for them to get there, they must take concrete steps. As I mentioned in the top of our conversation, Putin's objectives here, I think, are far more domestic. I think have far more about signaling to his domestic base at home that, look, he's powerful, he's capable, he's bringing these important world leaders, and they're coming to him. This can't be ignored. So, but I don't see that being significant steps forward in terms of their infrastructure, their organization, and their ability to propose anything that's counter to what the West is offering and is attractive enough for anybody outside of their core countries to want to join. Even their own countries, I think, it's going to be problematic to get them to adopt. They're not going to adopt each other's currencies, and until they put forward a unified currency, which even the Eurasian Union was not able to do, I just don't see it as having any real legs.
So what significance would you say, if you can just go a little bit into more detail, does this BRICS hold for the global South? I mean, how is Russia and particularly China positioning themselves as leaders of these developing nations? I mean, looking further, of course, than trade. And for instance, if we take, Saudi Arabia, right? What kind of, a lot of economic benefits are they seeing, and talking about particularly when it comes to oil production, for instance?
Sure. Oil and energy production on the part of Saudi Arabia is key for them. And in past, they've worked more closely with the West. In recent terms, they've worked more closely with the East, with Russia, China. Most of what we're seeing on this front are macroeconomic forces that are being led by those country governments. Again, unlike the West, where much of the economy is diversified and outside of the government, in virtually every one of these governments, the economy, the major pieces of the economy, are directly linked to those presidents. This is a fundamental difference in the way the world functions between the Western world, the democratic world, and these governments. Notice the tendency for the BRICS governments to be anti or non-democratic, with an exception of India being the world's largest democracy. But even there have been deep concerns over the past few years about the government that's currently there. It's worth watching. But if we look at China, if we look at Russia, there's a unifying factor in that they're anti-democratic with autocratic leaders that probably are going to die in office. Again, the models that they're putting forward are not in our interest. The same can be said for Saudi Arabia. It's unlikely that MBS will leave office until he's either quite aged or even passes away. But again, most of the decision-making that they're doing right now is directly connected to big interests. So the notion of oil and energy, they want to get either the best price or at the sales side, or the best price on the purchase side. India clearly is taking advantage right now of Russia in its diminished position vis-a-vis Ukraine and the war, and getting inexpensive oil, whereas Saudi Arabia wants to keep prices up and has been unwilling to sort of engage in some of the sanctions along with the West against Russia and even Iran in some cases. It's worth sort of paying attention to the macro forces. Are we seeing greater levels of sort of cross-trade between these countries? Are we seeing significant migration? While we see Russia with outbound migration to many places, I don't think you're seeing an extensive amount of Indian immigration to Russia, for instance, or Indian immigration to China. Until these countries can sort of work together on a more than sort of the autocrat to autocrat level, I just don't see BRICS moving forward in a significant way, because the relationship is not based on institutions, it's not based on values, it's based on strong men that are willing to shake hands and cut deals, but that's not systemic or enduring in the long term.
But at the same time, you do think that this BRICS Summit is going to expand further on throughout the years. I mean, with I believe Turkey is showing interest in joining, as well as Mongolia, if I'm not mistaken.
It would not be surprising that we'll see growth over time. The question is, do we see something more than just a talk shop? Do we see significant reforms and significant unification between these countries in a way that truly counters the Western democratic-led order?
Let me ask you this. I mean, aside from the business transaction deal that these countries are, in a way, from everything you're telling us here and explaining, are gathered to talk about, what can you tell us might be on the agenda? Any discussions about the current war in Ukraine?
No doubt this is behind the scenes being discussed. I mean, Russia could not be prosecuting its war without extensive support from allies. This is clearly China. It's clearly North Korea. Obviously, North Korea not within the BRICS community, but nevertheless, China being there. It could not be prosecuting this war as extensively without the support of Iran. Turkey has a more problematic situation with Russia. It's kind of playing both sides in a way, but nevertheless, I'm certain that there's coordination behind the scenes. There's requests, asks. Again, Russia cannot prosecute this war without its external allies and partners, in the same way that Ukraine cannot prosecute the war in defending itself without external allies and partners. Unfortunately, I think there's a little less hand-wringing within Russia's allies about whether it will support or not, and more unquestioned support. China is not offering red lines when it provides material assistance. North Korea is not offering red lines, whereas the West continues to sort of be concerned and sort of wring its hands about how Ukraine will use the weapons it's providing, rather than encouraging Ukraine to win the war, end it with a resounding sort of tone. I think that's problematic for the West. I think that's part of why the BRICS community has some growth. Yes, while BRICS is not directly related to war, the notion that there is definitive decisions to prosecute things and move forward in ways that I think the West often equivocates and hand wrings far too much.
And also, really, Russia, they're trying to show that it is not isolated from the world amongst its allies. Thank you so much, Joshua Bergenser from the Warsaw Security Forum, for breaking it down for us.
Thank you for having me today.
And we move on now to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Now, the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Russia's controversial foreign agent law violates the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, the court deemed the law arbitrary and leading to the intimidation and stigmatization of media outlets and human rights organizations.
Introduced in 2012 and expanded in 2022, the so-called foreign agent law requires entities in Russia receiving foreign funding to register as foreign agents, subjecting them to stringent reporting and labeling requirements. Critics argue it is part of a broader campaign to stifle dissent and curtail the work of independent media and rights defenders. The recent case in the European Court of Human Rights, brought by 107 plaintiffs, challenged the law's harsh restrictions. The court ruled that designating the plaintiffs as foreign agents imposed severe limitations on their activities and was intended to punish, not address, transparency concerns. Despite Russia's 2022 expulsion from the Council of Europe, the ruling covers actions prior to its removal, though Moscow has passed legislation blocking the enforcement of the court's decisions.
Now, as it turns out, Russia is ready to assist Belarus in maintaining stability during the 2025 presidential elections. Now, as part of their close security cooperation, the two nations are exchanging information on potential threats, with plans to further solidify their alliance through a new security agreement.
Russian ambassador to Belarus, Boris Gryzlov, announced that Russia and Belarus are exchanging information on potential threats and that Moscow is prepared to assist Minsk, if needed, during the 2025 presidential elections. Gryzlov emphasized that Belarusian law enforcement is capable of managing the situation independently, but, if necessary, Russia will provide support as part of their alliance. The ambassador also highlighted potential provocations during the elections, echoing concerns previously only raised by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. He also criticized Belarusian opposition figures abroad, stating that they have lost credibility and respect among their supporters.
Ukraine's military claims that it will soon have to face North Korean troops in the Kursk region. Now, the news about the deployment prompted South Korea to consider sending lethal aid to Kyiv.
Ukraine's defense intelligence chief, Kirill Budanov, has revealed that North Korean troops are expected to arrive in Russia's Kursk region on October 23rd to help defend against Ukrainian forces. The development follows a June agreement between Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, pledging mutual support. The reported deployment of North Korean soldiers has prompted Seoul to consider sending military advisors and advanced weaponry to Ukraine. If confirmed, this would mark South Korea's first direct military assistance to Ukraine. Unverified reports suggest that North Korean infantry soldiers are already training in Russia, and some officers may already be on the ground in Russian-occupied Ukraine.
Ukrainian Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin has announced his resignation following a draft dodging scandal involving high-ranking officials, including employees within his own office. And the scandal revolves around individuals obtaining fake disability certificates through bribes to avoid military service.
According to Ukrainian law, those with disabilities are exempt from military service and receive government benefits. As it turns out, some took advantage of this law. Investigations have revealed widespread corruption, with nearly 2,400 cases currently being examined, and the Security Service of Ukraine dismantling 8 criminal groups linked to the Medical Social Expertise Commissions, which issue disability certifications. The country's Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin has resigned, aligning with President Volodymyr Zelensky's demand for accountability. The scandal has shaken confidence in Ukraine's legal and medical systems, with more high-level resignations expected as investigations continue.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. I'm Diana Skaya. Stay with us here on TVP World.